So I'm going to read a little bit more from this book called the Tainos by Irving Rouse. Let's move over here. We know more about the classic Tainos religion than about any other aspect of their culture, thanks to Father Ramon Pane, whom Columbus commissioned to study it. It centered on the worship of deities known as Zemis. They were two supreme deities, Yukahu, the lord of cassava and the sea, whence the Taino obtained their sustenance, and Atape, his mother, who was the goddess of fresh water and human fertility. Women prayed to her for a safe childbirth. The lesser Zemis included the spirits of ancestors, as well as the spirits believed to live in trees, rocks, and other features of the landscape. They are discussed in detail in Chapter 5. The term Zemi was applied not only to deities themselves, but also to idols and fetishes representing them, which were made from the remains of ancestors or from natural objects, believed to be inhabited by powerful spirits. Wood, stone, bone, shell, or pottery was used for the purpose. In historic time, at least, the Zemis were also made of cotton cloth. Each person had as many as 10 of them, which he or she prized because of the power they were thought to confer. People boasted that theirs was the best, and they passed them on by inheritance, gift, or trade. I'm gonna get some coffee. Owners kept their Zemis in niches or on tables in their homes. Some chiefs housed theirs in separate structures, presumably built like their houses, which served as temples. Zemis have also been found in caves, but they may not all have been worshipped there. Some may have been taken there to save them from destruction by the Spaniards, who consider them to be heathen gods. When a male cacique died, one or two of his wives might be buried with him. His body was commonly flexed, bound with cotton cloth, and placed in the ground with his ornaments and other prized possessions. Alternatively, parts of the body might be preserved as Zemis in temples or shrine caves. Ordinary people were interred in the ground or in caves, or else some of their bones were preserved as Zemis after the flesh had decomposed. The classic Tainos are said to have decorated their pottery, ornaments, and other artifacts with the figures of Zemis, and to have painted or tattooed them on their bodies. In addition, they carved or painted outlines of the natural spirits in places where they believed them to live, especially in caves and on rocks along streams or coasts. These so-called petroglyphs and pictographs were not necessarily objects of worship. Before communing with their Zemis, owners purified themselves by fasting or by inserting a stick in their throat to cause vomiting. They then took snuff, kohopa, in front of the Zemi. The worshipper put the snuff made by crushing seeds of the pt.3 tree on a platform surmounting the Zemi or in a separate receptacle and inhaled it through a forked tube. It caused hallucinations through which the Zemi made known his or her will. Owners offered food to their Zemis to propitiate them. Once a year, the whole village paid similar homage to the chief Zemis. The chief presided, assisted by other personages acting as priests. The ceremony began with a procession of the villagers, wearing their ornaments, carrying baskets of cassava bread, and singing songs about the Zemis. The chief sat at the entrance of the temple beating a drum, while the priests entered and dressed the Zemis. The villagers presented themselves before the temple and purified themselves by pressing a stick down their throat and vomiting. The women then brought their cassava bread to the priests, who offered it to the Zemis. Dancing followed. The audience sang the praises of the Zemis and of former chiefs, and offered prayers for the prosperity of the village. Finally, the priests broke up the bread and distributed pieces to the heads of the families. These fragments were preserved throughout the year as a protection against accidents. The chroniclers also mention shamans, bohuti, who cured the sick on demand. They worked in the presence of the priests and received gifts of cassava in return for their services. They painted the figures of their Zemis on their bodies and communicated with them in seances. Both the shaman and the patient fasted before the curing ritual. The shaman took snuff, presumably in front of the figure of a Zemi in his own house, to learn the cause of the disease. He then proceeded to the sick person's home, where he swallowed an herb, kiyoya, to induce vomiting. He lighted a torch and sang, accompanying himself with a rattle. They approached the patient and pretended to suck an object from the latter's body. This object was considered to be the cause of the disease. Often the shaman would give it to the patient after recovery to keep as a Zemi. The cacique's house, and presumably his or her temple, faced on the central plaza where dances and ceremonies were held. The areas in which these activities took place may be termed dance grounds, for the chroniclers do not state that the areas were bounded by walls or other structures. Archaeologists, however, have identified enclosures that classic Tainos built to take the place of dance grounds. These structures, which consist of embankments of earth or stone slabs, often decorated with engravings of Zemis, are oval, rectangular, or long and narrow, like roads. They occasionally contain monumental carvings of Zemis. They may be termed dance courts. The annual homages to the chief Zemis took place on the central dance ground or court. Other rituals performed there before and after battles and upon marriage or death of a chief, and so were ceremonies areito, celebrating the deeds of ancestors. The dances were accompanied by singing, drumming, and rattling. The classic Tainos also played ball on the central plaza and elsewhere. Their ancestors appear to have used non-structured areas, which may be termed ball grounds. They themselves often constructed specially designed ball courts, applying the term bate to both the game and the court where it was played. The court is said to have been rectangular. Ordinary spectators sat on its stones or embankments, the caciques and nobles on their stools. The courts within the villages were for intramural games. Other courts in the countryside were for games between villages. Gary S. Vesalius, Personal Communication, has noted that the most elaborate courts in Puerto Rico were on the putative boundaries of chiefdoms, and has suggested that they were used for games between polities. Both men and women participated, always separately. The teams each with 10 to 30 players occupied opposite ends of the court, as in tennis, and alternated in serving the ball. players attempted to keep it in motion by bouncing it back and forth from their bodies to the ground inside the limits of the court. They were not allowed to touch it with their hands or feet. Its elasticity amazed the Spaniards, who had never seen rubber, the substance of which it was made. Courts are said to have been in constant use. Wagers were made by the players, and in the case of inter-village games, by their caciques, who also offered small prizes, food for example. The game was occasionally played before public decisions were made. Archaeological research has confirmed the foregoing ethno-historical information. Earth and stone-lined courts in which the ball game could have been played have been found throughout Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. The distribution of these structures extends to the eastern tip of Cuba and to St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. There is reason to believe that the classic Tainos established outposts in both places, possibly in order to trade with the western and eastern Tainos. Unlike the present inhabitants of the West Indies, the natives traveled by sea whenever possible. They used canoa, which they hollowed out of logs by alternately charring and chopping them with pedaloid stone axes known as skelts. Spade-shaped paddles were the only means of propulsion until the Spaniards introduced sails. The largest canoes belonged to the chiefs. They were carved, painted, and kept in special boathouses, reminiscent of those in Polynesia. Columbus reported that they could hold up to 150 people. On land, the chiefs traveled in litters, and the ordinary people by foot. The latter carried burdens suspending from balance poles. Both men and women were eligible to serve as chiefs, and such to live in specially built houses, sit on throne-like stools, and have special forms of transportation, and wear insignia of their rank. Each cacique presided over the village in which he or she lived. They organized the daily activities and were responsible for the storage of surplus commodities, which they kept in buildings constructed for the purpose and distributed among the villagers as needed. They acted as hosts when the village received visitors and had charge of the political relations with other villages. The caciques owned the most powerful zemis and supervised their worship. They organized the public feasts and dances, and having learned the songs by heart, directed the singing. Because their canoes were the largest in the village, they were responsible for public forms of transportation. Village chiefs reportedly had the power of life or death over their subjects. The district of regional chiefs did not exercise this kind of control, but could requisition food and military service. Their ability to do so depended upon their personalities and political relations. The classic Taino believed that they had originally come from caves in a sacred mountain on the island of Hispaniola. Individuals traced their descent through their mothers rather than their fathers. Goods, class status, and the office of chief were also inherited matrilineally. A man resided in the village of his mother's lineage. If he chose a wife from another village, he brought her to his own. Polygyny was prevalent. Most men probably obtained wives in or near their own villages, but chiefs sometimes arranged long-distance marriages for political purposes. The commoner had to temporarily serve his prospective bride's family to compensated for her loss. A chief could instead make a payment of goods Only a chief could afford to have many wives. Trade was widespread. Parties or single persons undertook long sea voyages for the purpose. Some districts excelled in making particular products. For example, Gonave Island, off the western coast of Haiti, was known for its wooden bowls. Residents of eastern Hispaniola and western Puerto Rico are said to have exchanged daily visits across them on a passage. Such interaction was facilitated by a common language. The classic Tainos fought among themselves to avenge murders, to dissolve disputes over hunting and fishing rights, or to force a chief who had received a bride price to deliver the woman purchased. They did not themselves obtain additional wives by raiding other communities, and the difficulty fending off the island Caribs, who did. Only the chiefs and nobles attended meetings at which war was declared. The chief was elected to lead the attack. The nobles served as his or her bodyguard. Before going into battle, they painted their bodies red, hung small images of Zemis on their forehead, danced and danced. They fought with the clubs Macana, with spears propelled by throwing sticks, and in the eastern part of their territory, with bows and arrows. The Siguayan and Borinquen Tainos of northeastern Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, respectively, are said to have been the most warlike, probably because they were forced to defend themselves against island Carib raids. Western and Eastern Tainos. Because of the scarcity of documentary evidence about the people who lived immediately to the west and to the east of the classic Tainos, ethno-historians have had to use the results of archaeological research to fill out their knowledge. That research has confirmed the presence of the Western Tainos in Jamaica, Central Cuba, and the Bahama Islands, and has shown that the classic Tainos established outposts in eastern Cuba and the Turks and Caicos Islands. It also indicates that the classic Tainos had an eastern outpost on St. Croix Island, and that the rest of the Virgin Islands and all except the southernmost Leeward Islands were populated by Eastern Tainos. The Western Taino villages appear to have been large except in the Bahamayan archipelago, where they contained only an estimated 120 to 225 people, divided among 12 to 15 houses. The Eastern Taino settlements probably had a similar range. Some islands may have become completely depopulated because their villages were too small to defend themselves against island Carib raids. The density of Jamaica's population suggests that its inhabitants practiced the same advanced form of agriculture as the classic Tainos. In the absence of information to the contrary, the other Western Tainos and all the Eastern Tainos are presumed to have only used the slash and burn technique. Carl O. Sawyer has theorized that the clay soil of the Cuban plains was too heavy to be mounted up with digging sticks, in addition to which it would not have drained, as well as the granular soil heaped up in the conifers of the more central islands. There is archaeological evidence that some Bahamian villages were divided into halves. William F. Keegan and Morgan D. McLaughlin concluded that if and when these moieties split and become separate villages, they may have continued their affiliation, and that the affiliated villages may have evolved into district chiefdoms. They note that the Spaniards encountered such a chiefdom on Ackland Island in the Bahamas. No regional chiefdoms like those also present among the classic Tainos are reported. Independent villages must have been the rule in less developed areas. The chronicles indicate that the native Jamaicans had the greatest variety of ornaments among the Western Tainos, many showing rank. I started this video soft spoken.